Shadow of the Erdtree is a fantastic expansion, if it can even be called that. It is bigger and has more quality than most AAA games that come out. It has a gorgeous world, a lot of secrets to find, and many new bosses to fight. However, it is also extremely controversial amongst fans for a few reasons, but I'll get into that soon. And of course, I don't know if I still have to say this, but I'll be showing most things in the DLC, so there will be spoilers in case anyone hasn't beat it yet. Shadow of the Erdtree is huge. My playthrough lasted over 20 hours and I don't even think I've done everything. I fought all the remembrance bosses, or legends I believe they're called in the DLC, but there is definitely some things I haven't discovered. There is a great variety of areas and colours, and just overall was amazing exploring this new world. The exploration is, in my opinion, the best part about the base game, and is the same here. The feeling of going wherever you want and finding new items or a boss or even access to an entire new area is what made Elden Ring so special and feels just as good here. There's also a lot of new caves to explore which are similar to the ones in the base game. They are a lot bigger but are still the same with a smaller boss at the end. Again, it'll be the same as in a normal game where they were fun to do for the first playthrough but are not interesting enough to want to do again. And also some legend bosses have a legacy dungeon with a more traditional way of progressing. I don't think they reach the heights of Stormveil, Raya Lucaria, etc, but they work fine. And there's also a lot of field bosses. The Wicker Man technically isn't a boss, but sure feels like one. The first one you see is a real eye-opener and realization what you are in for this DLC. But for the most part, the others are either some bosses from the base game or some minor ones you find for the DLC. However, as much good there is in the DLC, there is a lot of controversy. The difficulty of the DLC is the biggest talking point, and I'll be honest, I'm somewhere right in the middle of it. People who defend it say things like, it's supposed to be hard, or the infamous get good line, or people claim that it's too hard as most enemies can 2 or 3 shot you, boss or not, and are really struggling with it. You do get these things called Erdtree fragments in the DLC, which are the main way to upgrade damage output and to take less damage. They actually matter more than just leveling up your character. They work similarly to the prayer beads and memories from Sekiro. Now they do absolutely help, but it got to a point where it did feel quite negligible. It felt like there wasn't too big a damage difference, especially since with a late game build you were already doing quite a lot of damage, and I didn't notice too much damage negation either. But it is absolutely worthwhile to get them. Going back to earlier areas with them is fine and enemies barely damage you like they did at the start, but it feels like they don't scale well with your progression. It was kinda hard to gauge what level to enter the DLC in. I was around 160 and I was struggling just as much as people 200 plus. So these Erdtree fragments were definitely the most decisive thing for upgrading your character. I do completely get the frustration that the DLC has caused. I dislike the Neo games for this exact reason, of every attack being lethal from any enemy, yet their movesets don't account for it. They have long combos that have little to no wind up, so that was pretty annoying in the DLC, but I think the biggest point of contention is the bosses. So the bosses, and in particular the legend bosses, are some of the coolest, most intricate, most bullshit bosses the series has to offer. Now most of the lesser ones were fine, they were pretty enjoyable and have some memorable designs. And then with the Dancing Lion, that is a really cool fight, one of the coolest models for a boss I've seen, and it's actually pretty easy. It doesn't have that much health and doesn't hit incredibly hard, which makes it a good first legend boss to fight. Then we come to Relana, who was the first real wall I faced. She is really fast and most of her combos have a follow-up. There is also very little downtime between her attacks, making your own attack windows very limited. She has this moon attack in the second phase, which if you are caught in it will kill you no matter what. And I thought this was the best way to do an attack like that because, as I'll get to with later bosses, if you are going to have a really devastating attack, there needs to be a wind up or a long enough time to know what is going to happen. Like King Alant's big AoE in Demon Souls, you can see him charging it up and you have time to get out. Relana was difficult but still felt fair and satisfying to actually learn to fight. Now I can guarantee after a few more times fighting these bosses my opinions will change, as most of the things I fought came from frustration while doing the boss, but after beating them I would realise they were actually pretty good, and that is exactly what happened with Mesmer. During this fight I hated him for the most part. I thought some things were actually unfair, but then after beating him, he's actually one of my favourite fights in all of Soulsborne. I love his opener where if you mistime it you will take a lot of damage, but if not you get a free attack and it feels so satisfying. And he doesn't have that much health but hits really hard, so it does kind of balance it out. His big spear attack was really cool, and getting the dodging timing down was really fun, and even his second phase with all these serpents, you can still dodge them all just fine. I actually think Mesmer is the peak of the DLC, and I will need some more time to think about this, but it's definitely a contender for one of, if not the best boss in the entire series. And Bale was similar to R'Lana for me, as while fighting he was incredibly infuriating as a lot of things felt unfair. He does a truckload of damage and has a large hitbox. He also does a lot of fire attacks which has a very large AoE. But again for Bale, looking back, a lot of my anger came from failing, where now I think it was really fun, even if I did feel some things were a bit cheesy. But what I will not change my mind on, at least I don't think I will, is the final boss. Now it was already, for me at least, quite disappointing seeing Radahn again. I get it's a different fight entirely and some lore reasonings, but still felt quite cheap. This is hands down one of the worst experiences I've had in these games. Radahn is on a very thin line from being unfair. Radahn hits extremely hard, I'm talking 3 hits max and you are dead. I tried many different armors, talismans, leveling up different stats, whatever, and he still hits incredibly hard. Now his first phase is actually really fun when I got it down. I got to the point where I was pretty much no-hitting it every attempt. But he does have this one combo where I either must be completely stupid or there is just no way to avoid taking damage. He has this 3-hit combo he can pull out suddenly, and if you are hit by one of the first 2 swings, particularly the second one, you are staggered and there is no way to avoid the final swing. And most of the time, with the amount of damage he does, this is an instant kill, and he can do this at any point. I tried everything, rolling forwards, backwards, left or right, trying to poise through it or light roll it, but nothing worked. You still get stun locked and will likely die each and every time. Even if you dodge the first swing, the second one is so fast it catches you right after you've dodged. A good 40% of my attempts ended with this combo. I still have no idea how you avoid it, and it is absolutely one of the worst attacks in these games. But then the second phase gives it a run for its money. As with this DLC, the best way to put it is overtuned. Every finisher attack in his combos now have a follow-up. This would be fine if he actually had a stamina bar. He finishes a combo and within a second goes straight into another one, all while you are trying to see his animations through Miquella's hair blocking part of him and all these lights flashbanging your screen. He also has these super big attacks which, for what I have seen, are just completely unavoidable. He does this one after his meteor attack that he slams down 3 times as a shade, and then the 4th one has a light beam that trails after it along on the ground, and then an AoE right after, literally 3 attacks in one. And this will one-shot you if the first follow-up staggers you. I just don't see how a melee-only, no bleed or summon, no hit would be possible on him. Just a lot of damage taken feels out of your control. I've never had to change a build ever, but I must have done it about 5 times for Radahn alone. The progression of these games should absolutely not be in this direction of Radahn's Shade or Malenia's Waterfowl. These things are great for spectacle and engagement online about the games, but not for actually playing. Dark Souls 3 is the most perfect balance of this. Midir and Gale are fantastic spectacles, but also have really fun, fair and challenging movesets. Gale's final phases with lightning around the arena and his cape as a follow-up is absolutely challenging, but he has enough downtime so you can get your own attacks in, and he staggers pretty easily as well. There is rarely any downtime with Radahn. He's constantly doing some 10-second long combo, and there's literally points where you've got like 20 plus seconds of just waiting to be able to do your own attack. And this is the main problem I have with the arguments online about this DLC's difficulty. Yes, this is supposed to be hard, and overcoming these challenges are exhilarating, and that feeling is what FromSoft intend. But that and just saying get good cannot and do not excuse for some really shitty mechanics that are prominent throughout this DLC. There absolutely needs to be a middle ground here where the spectacle and challenge needs to be large enough to make overcoming it feel amazing, but not at the expense of the player feeling cheated or hitting a wall all because of one mechanic or design choice. As I said, Dark Souls 3 was a great standard for this. The DLC bosses were tough but incredibly fair. I know they feel they have to evolve on that formula, and sure, I do think they absolutely do, but this is not the right directions for bosses to go. I don't want combos to keep getting longer and longer and damage to get more and more. I want fair but challenging attacks and a rhythmic back and forth like Dark Souls 3 provided. Now again, overcoming these bosses was really great, but also just gives a lot of relief that it's finally over. I don't feel I bested Radahn. I bested his first phase, I mastered it and it was really fun afterwards, but the second phase I feel like I barely got through it by tanking a lot of unavoidable damage and using most of my Estus, and then getting lucky enough with his movesets that I was able to beat him. I think just telling players to get good is completely missing the point of why this DLC is so divisive. You can get good at Dark Souls 3 or Sekiro, but this DLC pushes things to a whole new level that most players will not be able to handle. I mean, look at me, right? I've got thousands of hours in these games. I've no-hit Elden Ring and done multiple all-boss, level 1 playthroughs or just whatever, right? And this DLC has definitely been one of the most polarizing things I've played from Software. I think the spectacle and the designs they have made are really cool and absolutely have a lot of work put into them, but they have actually gone too far in the way of making it challenging. I really want it somewhere in between this DLC and Dark Souls 3, as I would say that is a really good sweet spot for bosses. The infamy of Malenia and what Radahn will surely have is definitely something to work with. It needs to have some balance in there as well. And it is frustrating because Elden Ring's base game and DLC, the bosses are really well designed, but then one little thing completely breaks it. Obviously with Malenia, if she didn't have Waterfall, she wouldn't be nearly as iconic. It would still have been a good fight. I know it must be pretty challenging to find new ways to evolve their formula while sticking to the same gameplay and mechanics of the Souls games, and of course I want them to keep innovating, but I want it to be done as fairly as possible and not rely on a cheap gimmick. Sorry if I went on a bit of a tangent there. Radahn was definitely one of the most challenging encounters I've had in these games, probably on the same level, if not more than Malenia. This DLC is really spectacular in a lot of ways, but I feel they went overboard. Bosses have reached quite a worrying point. The base game felt very unbalanced after Morgott. You got to the mountaintop of giants and started getting 2 or 3 shotted, and it feels the same here. Even with the Erdtree fragments, they still destroy your health bar. So it's absolutely understandable why this DLC got such mixed reactions, especially since there were a lot of new players in Elden Ring who are now playing this DLC. And it is not only being a shock to them, but to veterans as well. Definitely won't go down well with the newer players. I think the DLC is very polarizing with the bosses, and I think that both sides of the argument are right, as these bosses should feel like overcoming an enormous challenge, but not at the cost of unfair mechanics. Of course, I am incredibly curious as to what you guys thought of the DLC and its difficulty, but thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.